Hey guys, it's Mitch from Ramp Fitness. I'm here to bring you guys the blue collar health list that I often refer to as the WD40. WD40 is very important for us, and whether it's a blue collar or anybody that's working a lot or doing a lot of the same position type movements, we gotta loosen up the body. The WD40 idea is to get lubricant to the joints. If we move all the joints, we make them move a lot, or at least enough, it should be able to move in a better movement pattern and feel better within a little bit of the soft tissue kind of aches and pains that we oftentimes receive. This is Dan here right next to me. He's going to be my demonstrator today, giving us some of the ins and outs of what we should be doing as I give him a little bit of the cues for the whole list. So we got Dan here in the supine position to kind of start our list off of the WD40. The supine position is really just a little bit of an alignment between the shoulders, the hips, knees, and ankles. Okay, we want that compartment to be in the center, spine nice and neutral. Starting with a core brace, we're looking for about 20 seconds here. The core brace is what it's going to do is kind of posteriorly tilt the pelvis. If we do this correct, the knees are loose. We're not pushing with the feet or glutes. It's more of the abdominal specifically, pushing that lower back flat. The natural curvature, if I was to kind of go underneath, I should be able to almost go all the way, get at least 4 fingers underneath on a natural low back curve. We're taking that away to create abdominal activation. After that 20 seconds, we're gonna go into a couple overhead reaches. We're maintaining that 20 to 30% core brace and breathing throughout. I still want the same ideas. Knees are relatively loose. We want to have the feet flat to the ground. Dan's thinking about some neutral and natural breathing here, keeping the spine right in that center, not allowing things to change. With shoulder mobility, when people go overhead, we a lot of times lose that lower back lumbar stability. So that's a big factor here as well. Go ahead and go individual now. Good. And pretty much the same rules apply. Want to keep things, thumb going down, the overhead reach with an external rotation. That's with the thumb pointing to the ground. Helps our ball and socket of that humeral joint to actually sit in the center. So a little trick there is to always have that thumb touching towards the ground. That's great. Dan, let's go and go into our next exercise here. It's gonna be a hip bridge hold. What we're looking for here is glute activation. We wanna keep that core bracing at the 20 to 30%, making sure that we're not moving much of the spine. This is a hip hinge movement. Oftentimes we can have hamstrings become a problem here. Lifting up the toes and getting really the heavy emphasis on heel drive to get that heel and hip activation to be neutral. Let's go ahead and go all the way down. We're gonna bring our feet into more of a narrow stance. We'll lift the hips up again. All the same rules apply. Relatively loose. We wanna make sure that core bracing is still 20 to 30%. We're gonna add a march here. So it's gonna be one leg at a time, bringing the knee up into the chest. It really helps paint the picture for what happens when we go from a double to a single leg stability here, while one leg is into a mobile stage. It looks great. Good. Sometimes I like to change my hand position here. If I go palms down, palms up, it's sitting the shoulders in a neutral spot. To make this a tad bit harder so we don't have that tripod effect, we bring the hands upwards and make it to the point where maintaining that core stability is just a little bit more challenging. Dan, that's good. Let's go ahead and go down. We're gonna go back down, hands can go back out to our sides. We can kind of play with that progression there a little bit, just kind of depending on who the person is. We're gonna do an adducted pinch now from the hip. I've got a yoga block here. I'm gonna have Dan kind of squeeze between the knees. We're not squeezing so hard, just enough to the point where I can't quite get that out. Let's go ahead and lift up the hips again. It's just a hold, same rules apply. If you want to play with the heel drive, lift the toes. You want to make sure we're staying nice and neutral in the compartment up on top and breathing with the movement. That looks great. Dan, let's go ahead and go down. We're going to move into our next exercise here. We're going to go feet a tad bit wider from each other. Excellent. It's an in and out hip drop with an upper body rotation. So Dan, let's go ahead and fall over to our right side. From just there right away, we receive a little bit of an internal hip spot and an external hip spot. Okay, we're getting the hips to kind of move, and they're going to move kind of throughout with the upper body rotation. When Dan first starts here, scapula sit neutral. He reaches far, the scapula slides around the rib cage. And then we do that opposite effect where it's almost a retractive scapula, getting big and open into the chest here, long with some of our fascia lines from the opposite knee to the hand. And once he gets to this halfway point, and the legs now follow across with me, bringing internal onto this side, external here, and then bringing that arm over as well. That's great. Same rules again, 20 to 30% core brace. Breathe with your movement patterns here. We don't want to be over tight if we don't have to be. Looks great. Good. We're going to add in a factor here for variation and go overhead. This is a tad bit more challenging, as someone without the mobility or stability of the shoulder joint might not be able to do this very well, or at least without pain. So you got to make that kind of adjustment if the person needs so. Once again, still the same idea. You want to make it flow. You want to go with the arm first, then allow the legs to follow across, keeping that midsection. We don't want to get too much of that back curl, keeping that glute nice and active and the low back not arching excessively. Oh, looks good. Excellent. Dan, we're gonna go legs all the way out here. Hands are gonna stay up. Good, or stay out, excuse me, with the palms up, keeping the shoulder in a neutral position. Once again, spine is nice in that center, hips are reaching all the way long, heels as well. We're gonna go one at a time. Right foot's gonna come over towards his left hand, creating this long fascia line kind of back and forth. Dan, I'll let you do a couple of them here. Think about that 20 to 30% core brace. We don't want to allow for too much back arch here. This one's a lot easier to do rather than that in and out hip drop. We want to keep that at 20 to 30% so it doesn't go too much. When he sits over in this area with a relatively extended knee, we've got a long fascia line starting down from the foot up to the knee, hip, low back, T-spine, and across to the hand. Have people sit here and hold this, have them feel that area. Sometimes I'll even have them do some diaphragm breathing to allow that long line to be comfortable in this area. So almost have them do an inhale in, exhale with the hold, and come back to neutral. We'll go about 4 apiece there as well. Probably good. We're going to transition into the next stage here. I'm going to get Dan into a side lying position. I want him to bend his knees, bring the knees up towards the hips. A good cue here is going to be a little bit of that shoulders, hips, and heels. The clamshell is working a lot of the external rotators of the left hip, or whichever hip is up above. He's going to keep the feet touching, knees will lift up, and what I don't want to see is too much rock back. If I bring like a foam roller and put almost behind the hips there, we don't want to have that foam roller touch or tip over. If we put them against the wall, another easy little kind of, alignment process for you to kind of keep things nice and neutral. We got the spine sitting in the center. We don't want Dan onto his elbow. We want to make sure the spine is in the center and teaching the hip to make that movement process around this position. Dan, we're going to progress you next though with the elbow going down into a side plank position. This one's very similar to alignment, but we want more of the shoulders, hips, and knees to now be more of that straight line if I was standing over top. Dan, go ahead and pop up and lift those hips through. Good. Once again, neutral spine, 20 to 30% core brace. We're working a lot of the underside oblique as we don't want to allow the hips to drop to the ground. What I want to teach Dan here though is to find comfortable state. We don't want to be over bracing. We want to be comfortable here and relatively relaxed, allowing for the elbow to be below that shoulder. Palm up is the best suggestion there, so we don't really have that rotated inward, kind of unwanted stress into the shoulder joint in that bottom right side. Dan, the next stage here is we're going to lift up that top knee. The top knee is going to put a little bit more force into that bottom side glute med more so, and really just that hip complex. One thing I did see here with Dan is when he lifted that top leg, he almost got a little bit more of an excessive kind of, excessive curvature there. So I almost wanted to kind of think about drawing that belly button in, keeping it neutral with that 20 to 30% core brace, and good breathing throughout. So we're at the next stage here in a quadruped position. You can use this as a reference on Ramp Fitness for a little bit more detail. Real simple and easy cues is we want the wrist to be below the shoulders, the knees to be below the hips, and kind of that same idea of the neutral spine, nice and long, 20 to 30% core brace, head up on top of shoulders. A simple little thing is grabbing a PVC pipe or a foam roller, placing it up on the back. We want 1, 2, and 3 points for an attachment there. We don't want to have something be too high or the head be sitting down too low. We're going to veer you into the first exercise. It's going to be a cat rock. Okay, the cat-cow is an exercise that kind of makes the spine go up and down and finds neutral position. We do that a couple of times, and when we go into ours, it's going to be just the cat, and then we're rocking back into the hips. The reason we chose this is because the blue collar health, oftentimes they're sitting in extension for a long period or a long section of the day. So when we do that, a big section of breathing is very important too. When we go up, I like the inhale to be there, rock back, and then exhale in the back end. Exactly. So when we go up high, big inhale in, hold the breath, the diaphragm is large. When we sit back into the heels, that's when you'll exhale and come back to neutral. Exactly. And once again, back to that 4 position, wrist below shoulders, knees below hips. We're gonna advance into the broken bird dog. A lot of people have done a bird dog before. It's one arm and the opposite leg going back. We're going one at a time, so you can just kind of focus on that compartment staying in the center and the individual limb moving at a time. We're gonna start with just one of the arms. Think about reaching forward for a handshake. So when Dan's arm comes up, you gotta get his hand just like so, nice and long with the levers there. Think about scapula following the arm. Wherever that arm bone goes, the scapula follows as well. We'll advance into the legs, doing that as well. You can go clockwise, counterclockwise, doesn't matter. We wanna get each one done. What we're really looking at is keeping the neutral spine, not allowing the compartment to move very much. Very good. Then we're gonna advance into the next one. It's gonna be a single leg hip extension position. Good, so we're gonna go for a little bit of a T-spine rotation. Now we've got a short and a long arm lever option here. With people with shoulder issues or instability, we don't really necessarily always want to go long. So we're gonna start his left arm, which is the opposite. We've got the right arm and left leg down. Dan's gonna drop down, getting that shoulder to go down, the elbow to reach almost towards the opposite hand. Scapula is following, rib cage is following. Now when we slide across, Dan pauses right here. He's got his hand on the rib cage. We're pulling that rib cage up, and kind of that same idea, play with the breathing. We want you to be comfortable here. So even in that spot right there, someone has problem taking deep breaths in the diaphragm, have them go up and hold. Have them get that deep breath inside, exhale, and then come back down. We will do that on both sides. Dan, let's go and come back to neutral again, the quadruped position. We'll now go into a hip abducted position. So it's gonna be that right side again. It's going out. I'll sit here sometimes for a little bit to let them settle in. You get a big stretch on that right leg. The foot on the right side is not flat. Allow the bottom of the sole to kind of point away. Exactly. Now when we sit there, we're gonna then advance into a rock. What we don't want to see is the pelvis moving a ton or the spine moving a ton. You want to have some good breathing patterns, 20 to 30% core brace again, and rocking back and forth. You get a big stretch up in that upper groin and hip complex, mostly on that right side. Good little cue I like to think about here is if we think about where the belly button lies, go straight back and straight forward there. Don't allow that to go left or veer right, which will be obviously then changing the spine and the pelvic alignment. That looks great. Good, Dan, we'll advance into the next one. We've got a long arm and short arm variation here as well. We're gonna start with the short arm. I just wanted to do the exact same thing, pointing elbow towards me, and then we're rising up. Now we see here, his eyes are kind of following that elbow or hand. That's really allowing for some of the upper neck area muscles to kind of get long and strong with him too. And then we're thinking about that same idea is pulling that rib cage back, getting some of the paraspinals up on top here to become active and support that system. That looks great. Dan, why don't we exactly extend into that long lever now. Once again, I don't want to see this pop forward. Dan's got excellent range of motion here. We're looking for really just like a straight T is the idea. Playing with some good breathing patterns, eyes are up towards that hand and creating some long fascia lines. That fascia line here can almost start here. We go down to that right foot, up through the groin, through the abdomen, and then up to the hand. That looks great. So we're on to the last stage of the WD40 routine here. It's the standing position stage. Going over real quick, what we're looking for is a little bit of the ears, shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles to be in line. 20 to 30% core brace is still remaining throughout. We're starting first with the knee hug, just pulling the knee up to the chest. As long as we keep that bracing in the core, we shouldn't really allow for anything too crazy in the backside. The reach forward does allow that T-spine to make a little bit of that action to getting out of that neutral standing position, which is key. Next up is the butt kicker, just bringing the heel back to the front or to the back side of the butt. Exactly, we're looking for length in the quads. You might feel stretch, you might not. Don't search for it. Allow for just a good little pick and pull there. Excellent, excellent. We're going next into a pigeon and duck. Okay, pigeon and duck, we want to stay relatively neutral with the heels underneath the hips, and that's when we go with the toes pointed in and the toes pointed out. As you can see Dan going here, he's hinging down, which is lengthening the back sides of the legs. Now when the feet are pointed in or the feet are pointed out, it's changing the position of where the long bone of the femur connects up to the hips. We want to get that tissue around that hip capsule to be comfortable with the different types of angles as we stand in different types of positions all day long, especially blue collar. Looks great, Dan. Breathing here, still key, keep it neutral, breathe with the movement. Next up, we're going to hip hurdles. We can start in either direction, whether it's forward to backward or vice versa. Dan's going to go back to forward here first. Key things here, keeping the spine in the neutral. We don't want to see too much movement. Don't be frozen, do be loose. Loose is reactive, loose is fast. When we go to the other side and we put that front to the back side, we're just getting a different idea of what that hip capsule is doing, but everything within the body pretty much remains the same. It looks great. We will do both sides there as well. Dan, we're going to progress up. We're going to go a little wider than shoulder width here. Good. And you can go hands on the hips. You can do whatever you'd like with the hands. It's called hula hoop hip circles. You're just making a good circle in both directions. We'll go about 4 in each side. This is kind of painting that same idea. If the pelvis is sitting on top of both those limbs, don't let it rock back and forth. About sliding and gliding just around the top. That looks great. Nice and smooth. Good breathing there as well is key. The toe dance is the next exercise. This one's a little bit tough, as sometimes the balance can be a big factor here. So if we need something to kind of stabilize us, whether it's a counter up in front or some kind of a polar structure to give us a little more balance, please feel free to do so. You can see Danny's going to rock back into the heels and the toes. And when he does that, he's going to go in and then progress into a toe flexion. And when we do so, exactly, it's a little bit similar to duck and pigeon. The feet are going back and forth here, which is allowing the femur up on top into the hip socket to change position. Now when he goes up, it's an equal and smooth drop there. When he drops back for the change, we're really putting a lot of the weight into the heels. It's playing with everything from the ankles, excuse me, to the calves, and then obviously up into the hips there as well. Now our last exercise here is the sling swings. This one's a little bit more complex when we're going for the opposite sides. Now slings is how we are attached, anterior and posterior slings. Right here, right to left, that's more the anterior, obviously vice versa for the back. That's how we connect. We run that way. A lot of times we throw or get a lot of power within opposite contralateral forces. So when Dan's up on top on his right arm, that thumb is pointed back again. It's gonna help that humerus sit into the middle of the ball and socket of the joint. That's kind of what we've referenced a couple of times within this video here. Left leg is all the way back. He's 20 to 30% core brace. We are getting length in the front side. We do have a hip extended position on the left, so we want some glute activation. Now when he goes through this exercise, we'll be getting short and long in the front and back side variations there. When he comes up to the front, there is core activation. There is body alignment and body awareness is key, but we are getting some abdominal activation, hip flexion up in the front side, and it goes back and forth. So really the idea is long and strong in both directions. So we just got done with our WD40 list and routine for the blue collar health. You know, the idea there is to, kind of paint the picture for how we move our joints, how the lubricant can kind of help the things stay away from aches and pains. Dan, how are you feeling after that list there?
Feeling great. It was great. It was wonderful. The explanation was fantastic. If you like what you saw, go ahead and comment, subscribe. We're all over. We're all over social media, ramp.fitness. Subscribe, comment, like, get to know us. We'll respond. Thanks for listening.